Good day and welcome to Professional Skills 2, Lesson 25. We're in the home stretch. So today we're going to be discussing resolving conflict. And please start off by doing the self-assessment exercise on page 319 of your textbook. Pause the video here and come back to it when you are finished. So I would like to revisit the questions from our last class. How do you deal with conflict? Do you either chase it or do you avoid it? And have you had any personal conflicts in the last week? And how did you manage these? I want you to keep these conflicts in the forefront of your mind as we go through the course content. So conflict is a very natural part of life. I don't think there are any situations that you can find that don't have any conflict in them. And if they don't have any conflict, that probably means that conflict is being avoided. And that's also not a way to deal with conflict. So because conflict is a natural part of life, you're bound to meet some kind of conflict at work, in the workplace. And that's because a lot of times people have very different goals, and also because resources can be scarce. Organizational politics also play a role. So we've already discussed politicking to a large degree. So think about how these aspects also might play a role. And I think we need to reframe how we think about conflict, because it's really not necessarily a bad thing if all parties handle it in a professional way. If somebody's got a problem with you, wouldn't you rather that you spoke about it and discussed it in a calm and collected manner than you just avoided it or you had a blow up? Think about how conflict can be a good thing in your life. And conflict can stimulate creativity, innovation, and positive change. Obviously, this doesn't count in all cases. Conflicts aren't always constructive, but they do always need to be dealt with. So as a contributing member, or even more as a manager, it's really necessary that you are equipped to do this. So here are the skills needed for conflict resolution. Conflict resolution relies on goal setting, listening, feedback, persuasion, problem solving, managing change, persuasion, negotiating, and many others too. And you might have spotted the pattern here. Every single one of these professional skills is connected in some way. And that's why it's almost impossible to study them in complete isolation. And that's why we go through so many in this course, because they're interconnected. Your ability in one will impact upon your ability in another. And the ones that we've given you give you a solid grounding. So even though you might not have covered some forms of professional skills, you will still be able to engage in these skills when you are in the workplace because of the grounding that we have given you already. So here is the conflict management process. The first step is to determine your preferred style in terms of handling conflict. Next is to choose your battles. Next is to evaluate the people involved. Then to assess the source of the conflict, to know your options, and to choose an option. And again, this is very similar to the GROW model of coaching, because coaching can also be put to use in conflict management. And I'm going to expand on every single one of these in more detail. So first of all, determine your style. Success in any kind of interpersonal relations begins with self-awareness. This is why we harp on so much about it. This is why so many assessments covered this skill. Your self-awareness is vital in any kind of professional skill situation. It's important to know that our style can change according to the situation, but also that we understand what our base style is. The questionnaire that you did at the beginning of this class would have told you your style. So now I'd like you to just pause this video, read through your results one more time, and think about whether this matches how you've handled conflicts in the past. You can play the video as soon as you are done. Next is to choose your battles. You don't need to engage with every single conflict put in front of you. Knowing which conflicts are important is an important part of self-awareness. You don't have to fight every single fight, especially because if you do, especially with the small things, people won't take you seriously when you try to argue for the big things. That's not to say that you should let small things fly, but if it's something that doesn't really impact upon you, then that's all right. It is important not to avoid conflicts that are big because you're afraid of what might happen. You know in your gut whether it's the right time to stand up for something that isn't right. So you need to listen to that gut feeling. So if a conflict in the workplace does actually seem unmanageable, it might be a good idea to get in a mediator, and this can be a manager, to help you in your situation. The next step is to evaluate the players. You can ask questions like, who is involved in the conflict? Are you directly involved, or are you a mediator? Because it's really important to understand everyone involved. And based on this, you can know what their goals are and how they are motivated. You need to learn to see conflict through the eyes of everyone involved, because this helps you get an understanding of the bigger picture. After that, it's time to assess the source, because conflicts always have causes. It might not always be the direct cause right in front of you. There might be something else deep down that has caused the conflict. So once you understand the cause, you can solve the problem as well as prevent them from happening again, which is part of proactivity, seeing potential problems and stopping them from happening. Organizational conflicts are generally separated into 3 categories. The first is communication differences, so just different ways that 2 people communicate. Structural differences, that has to do with the organization and how you fit in. And then personal differences. This is just, differences in whether you get along with the person or not. And it is a thing about the workplace. You don't have to like a person to work with them. You can get along with them in the work environment and work with them perfectly well without ever really wanting them to be your best friend for life. So when you're looking at these categories, these categories that organizational conflicts are separated into, you need to ask whether the conflict is rooted in the individual or the organization. So here's an example. A new employee is making frequent errors, but they're not asking any questions before going ahead with new work. So that's a problem. But is this problem because of the individual, or is the problem because of the organization? So is this new employee afraid of asking questions, or was their manager really rude to them when they asked a few questions on the first day? So it's really important to know the entire situation before we head forward with the solution. So the next step is to know your options. There are 5 conflict resolution strategies. First of all, avoidance, then accommodation, then forcing, then compromise, and then collaboration. And you can take a little bit of time to read through these in your text. But all of the above, even avoidance and forcing, do have their place in conflict resolution. You need to just assess the situation thoroughly and figure out which one fits your situation. However, if you rely on one strategy too often, this might mean that this is just your default strategy. So in other words, if you avoid every single problem, every single time, then that's a sign that you are relying too heavily on avoidance and that you're not assessing the situation before going ahead with the solution. And then finally, you need to select the best option. So first recall what your style is, and then look at your goals. How would you like the situation to be resolved? And also, how important is the issue that is causing conflict? In addition, you can ask, how concerned are you with maintaining long-term relationships with all parties? And is there an element of time? All of the above needs to be taken into consideration because it will all impact on what the most appropriate resolution is. Alright, so I'd like you to complete the concept quiz on page 324 of your text. After that, please complete the application questions, reinforcement exercises, and the action plan on page 335 to 336. The action plan is incredibly important. Please go through this in great detail. And finally, the behavioral checklist. Every conflict resolution requires dealing directly with the conflict, assessing the source, empathizing with parties involved, using the appropriate style, and selecting the most appropriate solution. Moving on to next week's lesson, we're going to cover 2 really important and interconnected skills, as they all are in Prof skills, persuading and negotiation. So South Africa has a negotiating culture, especially when you're shopping at informal stores. So ask yourself, are you a good negotiator? And what makes you a good negotiator? I also want you to think about the power dynamics involved in negotiating, especially when we're talking about shopping at informal stores. The next thing I want you to think about is, do you have a friend that can persuade you to do almost anything? Or maybe it's a crush. Think about how that person persuades you to do just about anything. And then I want you to think about why some people are better negotiators or persuaders than others. Thanks everyone. Remember to get in touch if you have any questions. Enjoy the rest of your days. Bye.